The story of the Roman emperors begins with a sharp shift in how power was held and exercised in Rome. Once a republic where power was shared and debated in public forums, Rome became an empire ruled by one figure, the emperor. This change didn't happen overnight, and it certainly wasn't the result of just one man's ambition. It was the product of years of military conquest, political maneuvering, and the growing complexity of managing a vast empire. The first emperor, Augustus, was smart enough to avoid the mistakes of his predecessor, Julius Caesar. Caesar had been too open about his power grabs, and it cost him his life. Augustus played a different game. He presented himself as a humble leader, the first citizen of Rome, while quietly consolidating power. In reality, he controlled everything. This subtle yet total control allowed him to rule effectively and usher in the Pax Romana, a long period of peace and prosperity for the empire.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Under Augustus, the empire flourished. He expanded the empire's borders, reformed the military, and rebuilt the city of Rome. His rule was seen as a golden age, and for a time it looked like Rome would enjoy an endless period of stability. But with absolute power comes vulnerability. The peace and order Augustus established hid the growing problems beneath the surface. What happens when power becomes too centralized? We'll see as his successors struggle to maintain the empire and handle the enormous responsibilities Augustus had once carried. Power was often handed down not through merit but through bloodlines, which meant that later emperors were not always as capable or stable as Augustus. Take Tiberius, for example. He succeeded Augustus and was a competent ruler in many respects, but he was deeply paranoid. His reign was marked by increasing mistrust of the Senate and the political elite. His withdrawal from public life created a power vacuum that was filled by corrupt advisors and secret trials. When Caligula took over, things got even more chaotic. Known for his erratic behavior, Caligula's rule descended into madness as he squandered the empire's wealth and used fear to control his enemies. His assassination was inevitable. Rome at this point was still a formidable power, but the cracks were beginning to show. Claudius, who followed Caligula, was seen as a weak and indecisive leader, yet he managed to expand the empire further, notably through the conquest of Britain. However, the seeds of instability were sown deeper. His successor, Nero, is infamous for his tyranny and extravagance, and his rule saw the burning of Rome, possibly orchestrated by Nero himself. While this remains debated, what is certain is that Nero's obsession with personal power and revenge led to widespread unrest, weakening the authority of the emperors. The cycle of chaos and recovery continued as different emperors came and went, often leaving a trail of destruction or brief moments of reform. Some, like Vespasian, managed to stabilize things temporarily, while others, like Commodus, hastened the decline through self-indulgence and neglect of their duties. The more erratic the leadership, the more vulnerable Rome became to external pressures, whether from invading forces or economic strain. The tipping point came in the 3rd century, known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Rome saw no fewer than 20 emperors in the span of 50 years, many of whom were murdered or overthrown by rivals. The constant change in leadership left the empire in disarray, unable to defend its borders or maintain internal order. Civil wars drained the empire's resources, and the economy suffered under the weight of hyperinflation and a declining workforce. Military generals were often more interested in securing power for themselves than protecting the empire. The entire system seemed on the verge of collapse. But despite all of this turmoil, Rome wasn't quite finished yet. Diocletian, one of the last great emperors, recognized that the empire had grown too large and too complex to be ruled by one man. In a bid to restore stability, he introduced the tetrarchy, a system in which the empire was divided into 4 regions, each ruled by a separate emperor. On paper, this looked like the perfect solution to Rome's problems, a more localized and efficient system of governance. However, in practice, it simply delayed the inevitable. The division of the empire created a temporary calm, but it also highlighted the deep regional, cultural, and economic differences that had been simmering for years. These divisions made it increasingly difficult to maintain unity. When Diocletian retired, the tetrarchy quickly collapsed into infighting, and Rome was again plunged into chaos. The fall of Rome wasn't just the result of a few bad leaders or bad luck. It was a systemic failure. The very thing that had made Rome great, its ability to conquer and absorb different peoples and cultures, became its undoing. The empire became so large and diverse that it was impossible to govern effectively. Economic problems like heavy taxation, inflation, and reliance on slave labor crippled the economy. Meanwhile, Rome's enemies, barbarians from the north and east, were becoming stronger and more organized. The Western Roman Empire finally crumbled in 476 AD, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly 1,000 more years. But the fall of the West marked the end of ancient Rome as a dominant power. So what lessons can be learned from the rise and fall of the Roman emperors? Absolute power can lead to stability, but it's also fragile. When everything depends on one individual or a small group of individuals, the system becomes vulnerable to their weaknesses and failures. The structure of power matters as much as the person who holds it. What's more, empires, no matter how mighty, can't survive forever. They're built on systems that eventually become too complex or rigid to adapt to changing circumstances. In the end, the fall of the Roman emperors reminds us that no leader, no matter how powerful, can escape the consequences of their actions forever. The question isn't whether or not a great empire will fall, but when and why. The final part of this story will explore how Rome's legacy shaped the future and what the collapse of this vast empire means for the world that came after it. Stay tuned to discover the echoes of Rome that still resonate in modern governance, law, and culture. Now, as we move deeper into the narrative, let's examine how Rome reached its zenith and how that height created the perfect conditions for its eventual downfall. At its peak, under emperors like Trajan and Hadrian, the Roman Empire stretched from the edges of Britain all the way to the sands of the Sahara and from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. It was a vast, sprawling empire that encompassed diverse peoples, cultures, and economies. Yet as the empire grew, so did the complexity of ruling it. Trajan, who ruled from 98 to 117 AD, is often considered one of Rome's greatest emperors. He expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. His conquests brought enormous wealth into the empire, especially from Dacia, modern-day Romania, where the gold mines were a crucial resource. Trajan was not just a warrior emperor, he was also a builder. He commissioned roads, bridges, aqueducts, and public buildings that helped integrate the empire. Under his rule, the Roman economy flourished, and the military was at its peak strength. But even in Trajan's time, the seeds of decline were already being planted. The empire's vast size meant that communication between its far-flung provinces was slow and inefficient. While Trajan's military campaigns were successful, they stretched the empire's resources thin. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, recognized this and made a critical decision. He halted Rome's expansion and focused on consolidating its borders. His construction of Hadrian's Wall in Britain was symbolic of this change in focus from expansion to defense. Rome was no longer the aggressive conqueror it had once been, it was now defending what it had gained. Hadrian's reign saw the consolidation of Roman law and administration. His reforms streamlined the bureaucracy, making the empire more efficient. However, this administrative focus also exposed the fragility of Roman unity. The provinces were held together not just by the military might of Rome, but by an increasingly complex web of legal and economic ties. These ties depended on the stability of the central government. As long as the emperor remained strong, so did the empire. But when the center weakened, the entire structure would be at risk. The shift from expansion to defense meant that Rome had to face new threats, not just from outside but from within. The frontiers were increasingly difficult to defend, and barbarian tribes such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns were becoming more organized. They weren't just random bands of raiders anymore, they were forming alliances and learning from Rome's own tactics. One major problem was the economy. The empire relied heavily on slave labor, which created an unsustainable system. As Rome expanded, it captured slaves from conquered territories, but with the halt of expansion, the flow of new slaves slowed down. This created a labor shortage and made it harder to maintain the large estates that were vital to Rome's agricultural economy. Additionally, Rome's reliance on trade became a double-edged sword. While trade brought in wealth, it also exposed the empire to external economic pressures. Disruptions in trade routes, whether caused by wars or natural disasters, could cause widespread economic instability. The empire's problems were further exacerbated by the increasing gap between the rich and poor. The elite in Rome lived in luxury, while the average citizen struggled to make ends meet. Heavy taxation to support the military and the bureaucracy burdened the lower classes, leading to resentment. In some cases, entire regions revolted against the Roman tax collectors. Corruption also became rampant, with officials often pocketing funds meant for public works or military campaigns. This weakened the state from within as more and more people lost faith in the government. By the time we reached the 3rd century, Rome's problems reached a boiling point. The so-called crisis of the 3rd century was a period of extreme instability. Between 235 and 284 AD, the empire saw over 20 emperors, many of whom were assassinated or overthrown by rival generals. This constant turnover in leadership made it impossible for any one emperor to implement lasting reforms. Civil wars broke out as different factions vied for power, further draining the empire's already overburdened resources. During this time, the economy was in freefall. The currency was heavily devalued and inflation soared. The government tried to fix this by issuing new coins, but these were made with less precious metal, causing further inflation. Soldiers once loyal to Rome became more loyal to their commanders who promised them higher pay or land. This shift in loyalty weakened the central authority and made it harder to defend the empire's borders. The military, once the backbone of Roman power, was now a liability. The constant civil wars meant that Rome's armies were often fighting each other rather than defending against external threats. The barbarian tribes took advantage of this chaos, launching raids into Roman territory. In some cases, entire Roman provinces were lost to these invaders. At this point, Diocletian comes into the picture. He realized that the empire was too large for one man to rule. So in 284 AD, he divided the empire into 2 parts: the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. Each half had its own emperor and administrative system. This division, known as the Tetrarchy, was meant to make the empire more manageable. Diocletian also introduced economic reforms, such as the Edict of Maximum Prices, to combat inflation. He reformed the tax system, making it more equitable and efficient. On the surface, these reforms worked. The empire was stabilized, and Diocletian managed to hold it together during his reign. However, the division of the empire also set the stage for its eventual fall. The Western Roman Empire, in particular, struggled to maintain its borders. As the military became increasingly reliant on barbarian mercenaries, loyalty to Rome diminished. These mercenaries, while effective in battle, had little allegiance to the empire and were often more interested in their own gain. By the time we reached the final days of the Western Roman Empire, the city of Rome was a shadow of its former self. Senate, once a powerful institution, had become irrelevant. The emperor Romulus Augustulus was little more than a puppet. In 476 AD, the barbarian chieftain Odoacer deposed Romulus and sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, signaling the end of the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, would continue for nearly 1,000 more years, but the West was finished. So what caused the fall of the Roman emperors? It wasn't just one thing. It was a combination of internal weaknesses and external pressures. The empire became too large to govern effectively. The economy was stretched to its limits, and the military lost its loyalty to the state. Corruption, civil wars, and barbarian invasions all played their part. The rise and fall of the Roman emperors show us that even the mightiest empires are not immune to collapse. The final part of this explanation will focus on the legacy of the Roman Empire. How did the Roman emperors leave a lasting impact on governance, law, and culture? And how do the echoes of their reign still shape the world today? Let's continue and explore the enduring influence of Rome's imperial history. As we wrap up the story of the Roman emperors, we shift our focus from the collapse of their empire to the enduring legacy they left behind. Although the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, the influence of Roman governance, law, culture, and architecture still reverberates free, shaping the very foundations of modern civilization. One of the most significant legacies of the Roman emperors is the concept of centralized power. The model of governance that Augustus established a system where the emperor held ultimate authority while maintaining the appearance of a functioning Senate set the stage for centuries of political systems. Although this system decayed over time, it showed future leaders how to consolidate power while still giving the illusion of public involvement. It's a model that has been adapted, refined, and in some cases repeated across empires and governments ever since. Think about how modern governments function today. Many nations, especially in the West, operate with a centralized authority, balanced with elected officials and public institutions. While these modern systems are often more democratic, the idea of a single powerful executive, whether it's a president, prime minister, or monarch, can be traced back to the Roman emperors. Augustus showed how one person could command an empire, manage military affairs, create laws, and control the economy, all while maintaining political legitimacy through careful public relations and alliances. Roman law is another pillar of the empire's enduring legacy. The legal system that evolved under Roman emperors laid the groundwork for modern Western law. The Roman concept of jus civile, or civil law, was a body of rules and statutes that applied to Roman citizens. Over time, this evolved into a more comprehensive system that could apply to the entire empire, including non-citizens. This idea of codified law, clear, written laws that everyone must follow, became a cornerstone of legal systems around the world. The influence of Roman law is still seen in the legal traditions of many countries today. Civil law systems, especially in Europe and Latin America, owe much of their structure to Roman law. Concepts like contracts, property rights, and the presumption of innocence in legal proceedings all have their roots in Roman legal thinking. Even the idea of natural law, the belief that certain rights are inherent to all humans, was developed by Roman philosophers and jurists, and it continues to shape debates about human rights today. To beyond governance and law, the emperors also left an indelible mark on architecture and engineering. Roman emperors, particularly during the height of imperial power, were great patrons of public works. They built roads, aqueducts, temples, amphitheaters, and monuments that still stand today. The Romans were master builders, and their innovative use of concrete and arches allowed them to create structures that were not only functional but also grand and symbolic of their power. Structures like the Colosseum and the Pantheon in Rome are lasting symbols of the grandeur of the empire. These buildings weren't just for show, they served practical purposes and provided public entertainment, religious ceremonies, and social spaces. But they also projected the emperor's authority and reinforced the idea that the Roman Empire was not just a collection of conquered territories, it was a unified civilization under one ruler. Roman roads, many of which are still in use today, connected the empire and allowed for the quick movement of troops, goods, and information. The famous saying, "All roads lead to Rome," is a testament to the vast and efficient network of roads that the emperors built. These roads helped unify the empire, facilitating trade and cultural exchange between far-flung regions. The construction of aqueducts brought fresh water to cities, revolutionizing urban life and ensuring the health and prosperity of Roman citizens. But the legacy of the Roman emperors wasn't just about physical structures or laws. It was also about cultural influence. The Roman Empire was a melting pot of cultures, bringing together peoples from across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. The emperors often embraced these diverse influences, creating a hybrid culture that blended Roman, Greek, and local traditions. This cultural exchange enriched Roman society and contributed to the spread of ideas, art, religion, and technology. One of the most significant cultural shifts during the reign of the Roman emperors was the rise of Christianity. Initially, Christians were persecuted by emperors like Nero, who blamed them for the Great Fire of Rome. But over time, Christianity grew in strength and numbers, despite the efforts to suppress it. The turning point came with Emperor Constantine, who, after his conversion to Christianity, issued the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. Constantine's embrace of Christianity not only transformed the Roman Empire, but also set the stage for the spread of the religion across Europe and beyond. Christianity became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, and as the Western Empire collapsed, the Christian Church filled the power vacuum left by the emperors. The Roman Catholic Church, in particular, modeled its hierarchy and structure on the old Roman administrative system, with the Pope taking on a role similar to that of the emperor. The legacy of the emperors thus lived on in the Christian Church, which preserved Roman traditions, language, and law throughout the Middle Ages. As we look at the legacy of the Roman emperors, it's impossible to ignore their contributions to art and literature. Roman literature, heavily influenced by Greek works, flourished under the emperors. True writers like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid produced works that became classics of Western literature. These texts not only entertained and inspired Romans, but also shaped Western thought for centuries to come. Roman art, too, reflected the power and prestige of the emperors. Portraits of emperors were created in statues, coins, and paintings, solidifying their place in history and ensuring their legacy would endure. The fall of the Roman Empire did not mark the end of the influence of its emperors. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years after the fall of the West. Emperors like Justinian I sought to restore Roman glory, particularly through legal reforms such as the creation of the Corpus Juris Civilis, which would influence legal systems in Europe during the Renaissance and beyond. Byzantine emperors also carried on the traditions of Roman art, architecture, and governance, blending them with new influences from the East. In many ways, the legacy of the Roman emperors can be seen in modern civilization. From the architecture of modern government buildings to the legal systems that govern nations, the imprint of Rome is everywhere. The idea of centralized authority, codified laws, and monumental public works are all part of the Roman legacy. But even the concept of an empire, whether political, economic, or cultural, owes much to the example set by Rome. The story of the rise and fall of Roman emperors is a story of ambition, innovation, and ultimately the limits of power. The emperors who ruled Rome achieved great things, but their empire was not immune to the forces of change and decay. The lessons of their reigns remain relevant today. Power can create stability, but it can also sow the seeds of its own destruction. The question of how to balance authority with flexibility, strength with wisdom, is one that leaders throughout history have struggled with and will continue to struggle with for generations to come. Rome may have fallen, but its emperors left a legacy that continues to shape the world we live in today. Their achievements, their mistakes, and their vision for a united empire remain a testament to the complexities of human governance and the enduring quest for power.